Let's continue to talk about the second component of aggregate demand for goods and services, which is investment, okay? Or more specifically, the investment function or the investment curve. Now, the first thing we would like to clarify is here, as we already said back in chapter 2, the investment means real investment, okay? So it is not financial investment, okay? Financial investment might be, the purchase of stocks and bonds, other monetary assets, right? But again, here, what we mean is the real investment, okay? In other words, you purchase the machinery equipment, okay, and any business fixed investment, okay? Now, we believe that the investment is a function of real interest rate, okay, as you find here on the vertical axis. So, real interest rate means the nominal rate adjusted for inflation. Okay, we use the lowercase letter r, stands for real rate. Okay, and the horizontal axis is the quantity of the investment. As shown on this graph, this investment curve, it slopes downward, okay? But here we cannot take it granted, we have to prove it, okay? Actually, it's pretty simple to prove that. So what we need to do is basically pick, arbitrarily pick 2 points on this downward sloping investment curve. Let's say if this is point A, and then this is point A, and then here it's point B, okay? So we find that when we move from A to B along the curve on the vertical axis, we find that here is RA and here it's RB. In other words, the real interest rate falls, okay, from A to B, and we find that the investment increases from IA to IB. Alright, so let's put it here. When the interest rate goes up, the investment goes down as a result. So this is what we need to prove, okay, because this is basically the economic intuition behind this downward sloping curve, okay? Now, how could we show this or prove this, okay? Now, we know that when the interest rate, here on the graph, the interest rate goes down and the investment goes up, right? But vice versa, the investment goes up, the interest rate goes up, investment goes down, okay? So these two are just the same thing, okay? The two sides of the same coin, okay? So you can do, a lower interest rate leads to a higher investment, no problem, okay? Once you proved one, then the other would be automatically true, okay? Now here, let's still look at from A to B. We find the interest rate is lower, okay? The interest rate should be lower. Okay, I'm sorry about this. So here should be lower. So what does that mean for the firm, okay, when they say the interest rate is lower? And that means when they go to like Bank of America or Regions and borrow from them, they find that their borrowing cost would be lower because they pay lower interest, okay, a lower amount of interest. So we find that they tend to invest more, right? That does make sense. Now, why they want to invest more with a lower borrowing cost? Because it's cheaper, right? So it's cheaper for them to do the investment. So for example, they probably had some projects before the decrease in real interest rate. Okay. In other words, when the interest rate was back on the RA, this level, okay, or at point A. Now they find that these projects are not profitable because the borrowing cost was relatively high. Now from A to B, they find the interest rate is lower. They pay less to the banks to be able to borrow. So these projects now becomes profitable. They want to go ahead and borrow to be able to invest. Okay, so their investment will go up. All right. So basically, or intuitively, we proved that the investment is a downward sloping curve. Okay, and here one more question I want to leave for you guys to think about is, in this example we talk about the borrowing cost, right? Someone may argue that what if the firm does not need to borrow? Okay, in the real estate world, this means that some of these firms, like we heard, for example, Apple, right? They hold a lot of cash because they made a lot of profit probably in previous years, and then they accumulate a lot of cash at their hands. Okay, and so if there's any new investment projects they want to pursue, they don't have to go to banks. They got plenty of money in their own office. Okay, now does their investment curve still slopes downward? That's what we want to figure out. Okay, and because if we want to use the downward sloping investment curve, we want to be sure that this downward sloping nature is applicable to all firms on the market, no matter they need to borrow or not, right? So if they don't need to borrow, we have to make sense of this, what they're gonna do, how the change in real interest rate would affect their investment decision. Or do you believe that because they don't need to borrow, they don't care about any change in the real interest rate? Okay, so during our virtual meeting we're going to discuss these. All right, the third component of aggregate demand is from the government. It's government purchases or spending. Okay, now the definition is pretty simple. That's how much the government spends, okay, to purchase all it needs. Now here, the only thing we need to be careful is the transfer payments, okay, or the new definition of T, taxes. It's a net taxes. In other words, it's taxes minus the transfer payments. Now what are the transfer payments? It's all kinds of the benefits or aid programs the government provides, okay, such as unemployment benefit. Okay? Because you don't really work for the government, but once you are laid off or unemployed, you receive the cash from the government, okay, as your unemployment benefit. So when we look at the government, the taxes, we have to take this part off. Okay. All right. So what we're saying is here the government purchase, we use the letter G, okay, stands for that, the government spending, and net taxes we use T or NT, okay, to say that. So the government spending would be the money flowing out of the government offices, and the taxes or net taxes would be the money flows into the government offices. Okay, now budget deficit, budget surplus, this is pretty simple, right? So oops, I'm sorry. And if T minus G is greater than 0, that means the money the government collects is more than what it spends, right? So this is a budget surplus. Okay, this is a budget surplus. If it's less than 0, that means the government spends more than what it collects. This is a budget deficit. Okay, right now we see the U.S. federal government year by year, running a huge budget deficit. Okay, if it equals 0, that means the taxes are just equal to government purchases. So this means the government is running a balanced budget. Okay, all right. And then the determinants of the GNT. So the government spending is determined on Capitol Hill, right? Most of the time it's determined by political reasons, okay, or political considerations, okay, not really by the economic factors. Like, for example, the household, the firm, when we spend, the first thing we will look at is, as we discussed, on the previous video, how much we make, right? We want to make sure that, we don't overspend. But for the government, that's not the way it works, right? Most of the time, they don't look at how much taxes they collect. They just, figure out how much money they need to spend, okay? And then taxes depend upon the tax code and the tax rate, stuff like that. Again, it's primarily determined by politicians. Okay. All right. So now we can put everything together, so the aggregate demand for goods and services. So that's why I put the superscript D here, which stands for the demand. Okay. Aggregate demand equals C plus I plus G. Okay, and then on the next video, we're gonna step into section 3.4 and talk about equilibrium of these markets for goods and services. Okay, so we're gonna put the supply and demand together and do the graphical analysis, also mathematical derivation. Okay. And of course, as we always emphasize, that